If you love pumpkin and you love to make bread and you would love to find a way to incorporate pumpkin into your everyday bread that you make, you're going to love this video. Today we are going to be making pumpkin bread in the bread machine. This is not a pumpkin loaf like a dessert loaf or a sweet bread. This is pumpkin bread that you can make sandwiches out of, toast out of, or however you like to eat your bread. It's very simple, and I'm going to show you step by step how to make it in the bread machine. So let's go over the ingredients you're going to need to make this delicious pumpkin bread. You're going to need a good bread flour. Now, I know some people like to use all-purpose flour, and if that's what you want to use, please feel free. But I would like to say that bread flour does make a difference. I've had some people say that bread flour was expensive. I have not found in my area that bread flour is that much more expensive. I don't know, in different parts of the country maybe it is, because bread flour is just a flour that is a little higher in protein than your all-purpose flour. And I actually buy this high gluten flour, which is a bread flour. I buy it in bulk, and I have a link below to my Amazon shop where you can find this high gluten flour. And if you have any bulk stores, especially your Amish stores that sell flour goods and things like that, you can probably find a good bread flour there. But I love this high gluten flour whenever I'm making bread. You don't want to use a high gluten flour or a bread flour if you're making cake or cookies or things like that. Then you would use an all-purpose flour. Now, just because I wanted to make sure that it does make a difference, because I've always used the bread flour. The other night I made a loaf of bread just like I always make, and I used all-purpose flour. And the bread turned out okay, but what happened was when it did its final rise, and before it began to bake, it caved in, or either before it began to bake or when it began to bake, it kind of caved in on the top. Now the bread was still perfectly edible. The texture is a little different than when I used the bread flour, and I know the reason that it fell is because there was less gluten in that flour. So, and gluten is what gives your bread its strength and its elasticity. So if you're using all-purpose flour, which you can use, just be aware that you might have, you know, your loaf may rise a little and fall a little bit because it just doesn't have the strength to hold up. But it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the bread or that you can't eat the bread. It's just an appearance thing. It does, but it is also a texture thing. Your bread flour and your high gluten flours will give you a softer bread than all-purpose flour does. Not all flours are created equal. There's flours that are finer, ground finer, and different things. And so, but you use the flour of your choice. But I just wanted to say that I do use a bread flour, a very good bread flour, and it turns out really good bread. But if you want to use all-purpose, let's say that's all you have is all-purpose, don't let that stop you from making a loaf of bread, because it will make a loaf of bread. It just may not have the elasticity and the strength that bread would made from bread flour. And if bread flour is expensive in your area, but you still want to use it, you could do half bread flour and half all-purpose flour, and that will give your bread some more strength. And that way you wouldn't be using as much bread flour, but you would still get the strength that comes from the bread flour. Okay, enough about that. So we know we're going to need a flour. You're going to need some milk. You're going to need some oil. You're going to need some salt. You're going to need some brown sugar. You're going to need yeast. You're going to need some canned pumpkin. You can use fresh pumpkin if you want to use pumpkin that you have prepared yourself, you know, baked and got the flesh out of the pumpkin. You can use that. Just be aware that fresh pumpkin that you have prepared is going to have more liquid in it than the canned pumpkin. So that is going to cause your bread to need more flour most likely, or less pumpkin. I have not made it using fresh pumpkin, so I'm not sure like how you would have to alter that, and it really depends on how much of the water you can get out of your fresh pumpkin before you make your bread with it. So just make sure you strain it, or let it strain through a mesh cloth or something to get some of the liquid out of it before you make your bread with it. Otherwise, you're going to have to either alter some of the liquid or add more flour. And the problem with keep adding more flour, if you have too much liquid in the bread machine, you're going to get a really big loaf of bread, and your bread machine may not be able to handle that size. So anyway, sorry to go on and on about that. You're also going to need some pumpkin spice. Now, if you don't have the pumpkin spice mix, in my recipe below, I will give you the measurements for the nutmeg, the ginger, and the cinnamon that you need to put. You can also leave the spice out if you want, but I like the spice in it. It just makes a really good tasting bread, and you can still use this bread for sandwiches and toast and things like that. And there's just something about pumpkin spice in the fall that just really sets the ambiance. And also, I am going to use vanilla, so you'll need some vanilla. You can leave this out if you don't have vanilla, but we're going to put vanilla in it. So, and you're also going to need an egg. I believe that's all the ingredients. And now I know that might seem like a lot of ingredients, but this is a very tasty bread, and it's really not hard to put together because we're going to do it in the bread machine. And yes, you can make it without a bread machine. You just have to, it would be all the same ingredients. You just have to do the kneading and rising yourself. Just knead it together, let it rise, and punch it down and let it rise, and then bake it, and you'll be doing exactly what the bread machine does. No big deal. Okay, so make sure your paddle is in your bread pan. And I'm gonna try to come over here where you can see me measure things. So what you're gonna need to start off with, you're gonna need 1/4 cup of milk. So we're gonna get our 1/4 cup of milk. And this is whole raw milk. I'm so excited because I found a place I can purchase it. So you need 1/4 cup of milk, and you can use any kind of milk you want. Whole milk, skim milk. Whole milk will make a richer bread. And before I pour the milk in, I'm going to crack my egg into my cup with my milk. Like so. Let me get a whisk here. And I'm just going to take a whisk and just break that egg up a little bit. You don't have to beat it or anything. I just want to mix it up a little bit with the egg. So we have our 1/4 cup of milk, and we have our 1 egg, and we need 3/4 cup. I'm gonna go ahead and pour this into the bread machine. And we need 3/4 cup of canned pumpkin. Let me get this open. And I have a wonderful recipe for pumpkin muffins that will use exactly the rest of what's left of this canned pumpkin, so I don't have to waste the pumpkin. So I need 3/4 of a cup of canned pumpkin. Okay. There's my 3/4. Go ahead and put that into your bread machine pan. It smells good. Love pumpkin. I'm gonna set this over here so that it's not in my way. Okay, and you are going to need 1/4 cup of brown sugar. 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And anytime you're measuring brown sugar, you always want to pack it into your measuring cup. Put our sugar in there. Just gonna mix that around a little bit. We also need 1/4 cup of oil. You can use butter if you wish, but I actually like the texture that oil gives the bread. Sometimes I use butter, but I have found I really like the oil. And you are going to need 1¼ teaspoon. Oops. You're going to need 1¼ teaspoon of salt. So there's 1. And a 1/4. I'm just going to mix that a little bit. Nothing big. I'm just going to mix it around just a little bit. Then we're going to put 3 cups of bread flour on top. And I just measure my flour with the scooping method. You don't want to pack it down in there, you just want to scoop it out. And usually it turns out just right. Okay. Now on top of that, we are going to put 1 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. It doesn't matter what kind of yeast you have, active, you want active yeast, instant yeast, bread machine yeast, just active yeast. So I want 2 1/4 teaspoons. That was a 1/2 teaspoon. So that was 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, and a 1/4. And we also want to add our pumpkin spice. Now, if you don't like pumpkin spice, but you want to add some spice, you can use cinnamon. You could add 2 or 2.5 or 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Or you can use the pumpkin spice that you buy already made. Or you can just use cinnamon. Whatever you want to season yours with. I'm using the pumpkin pie spice, and I'm going to put 2 teaspoons. Put a little more because I can't get that. Couldn't get my spoonful. So now we're going to put it into our bread machine. Lock it in. I'm going to bring the camera down here and let you see how I set it. So once we have our pan locked into the bread machine, on our menu we are going to choose sweetbread, which is number 2 on my bread machine. If your bread machine does not have the sweetbread setting, the number 1 regular soft bread, white bread works as well. There's very little difference between the two, but I like to use number 2 on mine. I'm using the KBS 17-in-1, and the number 2 works really well. The only difference may be a slight amount of time in the kneading and a slight amount of time in the rising. I've looked in the book, and it's very little difference. And we are going to put the loaf size on the 2-pound loaf, and the color we are going to put on light, because I don't like a really dark crust on my bread. And so that brings my machine up to 3 hours and 4 minutes. And we're going to hit start. Now, as I always say, do not be afraid. You know, I just realized that I forgot my my vanilla. So if you're like me and you forgot something, it just started mixing. So I'm going to add teaspoon of vanilla, because it's not too late. And the vanilla is optional anyway, but I just realized I forgot that, so I went ahead and put that in now because I don't want to leave it out. Now, we open up our machine because we want to see how this is mixing. Now, it looks a little dry at first, but we're using pumpkin puree, and it may take a few minutes for the flour to absorb the moisture out of that pumpkin. So I'm going to let it knead for 2 or 3 minutes before I decide if I need to add any liquid. Okay, I'm going to try holding the camera. I wanted you to be able to see this dough ball and what it looks like. I did not add any liquid. It's been beating for 2 minutes. And so, see, it now looks like it should. This is what we want. It's moist through and through. You don't see any dry spots. And it's kneading really well. So just give it some time to absorb that moisture before you decide if you need to add any liquid. It usually turns out pretty good. So that looks and smells delicious. Now all we have to do is wait. So our bread, the beeper is about to go off. It has less than 1 minute left. Then we're going to take the bread out, take it out of the pan, put it on this wire rack and let it cool. And after it cools, I'll show you how I slice it and store it. There it is. Oh, we have a beautiful loaf of bread. Be very careful not to burn yourself. Now I took the beater out. Oh, look how beautiful that is. At that, so beautiful. So I'm going to sit it here on this wire rack. It smells delicious. It smells like pumpkin pie. I'm going to cover it with this little towel and let it cool down. You don't want to cut hot bread, because if I tried to cut this while it was hot, what would happen is it would just collapse and it would become doughy, and then it would get very dry because all the steam escaped. So we just want to let it sit here and cool naturally, and then when it's cool, it can still be kind of warm, not hot, and then we can slice it. But we're just going to let it cool. Then I'll bring you back and we will slice it, and I'll show you what it looks like. So our bread is pretty cool. It's still warm, but it's not hot. And we're going to go ahead and slice it. And I apologize for the lighting issues. It's starting to get dark here in a little bit, and I've lost some of my light from the windows. So I apologize if it's a little dark. But this is a bread slicer that I have. I bought this used at a thrift store years ago, and I still use it. I do have a link in my Amazon shop to a bread slicer. They don't make one exactly like this anymore, but you can find them. It just helps you keep your bread in even slices. And I use an electric knife. You can use any serrated knife. I like to use an electric knife. And I'm just going to slice my bread. And you want to start at the front. If your bread slicer tilts at the front, you want to start on the high end and slice backwards. This will help keep your slices even. And when you're slicing your bread, even if you're using a manual serrated knife or an electric knife, you don't want to push down on the bread. You want to let the knife do the work so that you're not squishing your bread. So we have it all sliced, and wow, just look at that. Doesn't that look good? Take this slice. Look at that, it is soft. It is so soft, pillowy soft. That is good bread. And it smells delicious. This will make a wonderful sandwich. It would make wonderful toast, or you could just butter it and serve it as a side if you were having whatever you're having for dinner. Let this be your bread. It is so good, so soft, so delicious, and it baked up beautifully. Pumpkin is wonderful to add to bread because it acts like a fat, and it just adds a wonderful texture to your bread, and I think you will love it. You should give it a try. I also want to show you how I store this bread. Now I bought these bags at a bulk store. You can also use Ziploc bags. If you're using a Ziploc bag, you want to get the 2.5 gallon size to fit your bread in nicely. And I found these. They're not Ziploc, but they're big enough to hold the bread. And you want to make sure your bread is completely cool because you don't want it to sweat inside the bag. And I just put it inside the bag. Try to keep all the slices together. That helps keep it fresh. And then you want to get out as much of the air as possible out of the bag and just tie it up nice and tight so that air doesn't get in there. And this bread we'll keep on the counter probably for, I don't know, it would probably keep a week pretty much. I mean, you could just watch it. You'll know when it's not any good anymore. I really don't ever have any go bad because we eat it pretty fast. You can also freeze it if you would like to freeze it. You can keep it in the freezer and then just take out as much as you need when you want it. I've never kept it in the refrigerator, but I'm sure you could keep it in the refrigerator. I think that might dry it out a little bit, but if you do freeze it, you want to make sure. I would probably double bag it if I had a bag like this, but get all the air out and make sure it's not going to get freezer burned or dry out in the freezer. But it keeps pretty good, and just keep it sealed up. Air is the enemy, especially of homemade bread, because we don't have any preservatives in them. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't subscribed and you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, hit the little notification bell so you'll get noticed when I put out new videos, and share with your friends. Invite others. Help me grow my channel. I appreciate you so much. If you have questions, leave them below. I do my best to answer all the questions I get. I will try to help you be successful in making your bread. Thanks for watching Butterfly Meadows Homestead. I'm Dorinda. Bye-bye.